Hey, it's Heidi Harris. This is something I've been doing now in addition to my Heidi Harris Show podcast. And we're doing a little crime oriented podcast, and we're going to be rolling this out pretty soon. Wanted to get this out to you guys because we don't know what's going to happen with the election. And obviously, subsequent to the election, are people going to get crazy, left, right, whatever? I don't know how bad it could possibly get. Tom Page has been joining me for many of these particular special podcasts, as it were. And I wanted to get his thoughts on what possibly could happen during incidents of civil unrest. Now, Tom is an over 30-year law enforcement professional. I'll put his bio in the description, but he's dealt with pretty much every aspect of policing, still giving back to the community, still teaching on policing and things like that. So I wanted to get his thoughts on civil unrest and how you can prepare yourself to handle situations like this. Tom, how are you? Thanks for being here again.
I am very well, and it's always a pleasure and a privilege.
Always happy to have you and your expertise. So the election's coming up, and this is not a political podcast. I do another one that's more political. This is not the political one. But we don't know what's going to happen after the election. We don't know when we're going to know who the president is or any of that nonsense. We know in 2020, we had a lot of protests, even going as far as the Las Vegas Strip. We had them all over the country. We know that. So my question to you as a law enforcement professional who's worked all over Las Vegas for decades, what should people be doing to prepare just in case the things get a little shaky out there?
Well, the very first thing and the most important thing is to stay informed. You can kind of gauge the heat of what's going on just by watching the various media outlets. You can gauge it by just conversations with your friends and that sort of thing. But the biggest thing is to stay informed. If it's a big demonstration and a planned one, they will sometimes meet with law enforcement and they'll go over this, that, and I'll use the example of the culinary. The culinary will get with Metro and say, we're going to do this. We're going to have this many people arrested, and then we're going to move on. And I don't know where you went, but I only see me now.
No, wait a minute. Wait, I want to stop you there. That's really interesting to me. So, and for the people who don't know, who are not from Las Vegas, the Culinary Union is the largest union in the state of Nevada, 60,000 members plus, and they're very powerful and they tend to have protests and whatnot. So they would meet with Metro and they would talk about how many people they expected to have arrested. I did not know that.
Yes. Well, they want it to be organized. They want it to be peaceful. They don't want anybody getting hurt. They don't want anybody overreacting or underreacting. So yeah, they'll say, hey, this is what the scope of our demonstration is going to be. This is how many people we expect. We're going to be sitting in the street. Yes, we expect people to be arrested or cited. And that's why, Metro will be out there and have their arrest teams. They'll have a detention bus and everything out there. But yeah, they will get together and meet so that they have some comprehensive plans on both sides so it doesn't get out of hand intentionally or unintentionally.
Interesting. Now, do you know anything that happened during 2020? Because I remember I was, getting up in the morning, as I did at that time for morning drive at, 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning. And I'm looking on Twitter and I see a picture of a bunch of protesters literally standing across the entire strip in front of the Mandalay Bay, which was where I worked at the time. And I texted my boss. I said, am I coming to work today? They were literally right in front of the Mandalay Bay, all the way across the strip. Now, by the time I got there, the boss said, no problem. They're going to be dispersed and whatnot. Right. So there wasn't a lot of tolerance for the nonsense that went on in Minnesota and places like that. That just didn't happen. Metro did not put up with that nonsense. No. So talk to me a little bit about that, what you heard, what you know about what happened during 2020.
Well, and that's really what it comes down to, is having those meetings and then the police department having their meetings. And to be quite honest, their line in the sand as to what's going to be acceptable in a peaceful protest and what's not going to be acceptable. And the other thing about it, like you mentioned, them across the street, that sort of thing. Typically what will happen is the police will show up there. You'll see them with their shields and helmets, and you have to remember that there's a twofold purpose to the shields and helmets and the skirmish lines and everything like that. One is to deal with the occurrence and a show of force, but the other is a psychological avenue of people seeing them like that, and you've seen maybe some videos, or I have, of departments in their skirmish line. And a skirmish line is just a line of officers stretching from one side of the street to the other with the arrest teams behind it. And they'll be, lightly tapping on the shields with their batons and maybe doing a goose step, whatever the department's been trained. That's the psychological of listen, folks, we're coming. Please leave. It does nobody any good to have mass arrest, that sort of thing. So it's them drawing their line in the sand. Then what will happen is the incident commander, be it a lieutenant, a captain, or a deputy chief, whoever's been assigned to it based on the magnitude of the demonstration, will go to whoever he believes is in charge. He'll have some conversation with them about, listen, this is what we would like you to do. Then they will loudly give an order to disperse, declare it an unlawful assembly, give them an opportunity to disperse, what's reasonable, and then start making arrests.
Interesting. Okay. So, and you notice, like I said, the Metro does not put up with any nonsense. When I used to leave my morning show on the Strip every day and drive down the Strip, if somebody set a bag down, a backpack, pulled up a shopping cart, it was gone. There were 4 police cars around them. They don't put up with nonsense because potentially that backpack also could carry explosives and all
Sure.
that kind of thing. Plus, they're just not going to put up with homeless people that would thank God for the Metro, what they do on the Strip. So if there were something starting on the Strip, I get the impression that Metro would tamp it down pretty quickly then.
Well, yeah, for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, public safety. But we can't forget that the Strip is the largest economy-based income for the state and for Las Vegas. And you can't have a bad reputation going out across the country that this is what the police department allowed. But it's very organized, very precise. But the biggest thing is to stay informed. Watch the news media. Depending on the magnitude of the civil unrest, would it come across the emergency broadcast system? I don't know. You want to listen for the fact, is it anticipated that the county commission will declare a state of emergency, so to speak? Kind of like what Sisolak did with COVID, saying, this is a state of emergency. This is what's going to happen, distancing, everybody stay home. And like that. So the biggest thing is to stay informed, because the things that you want to know too is, where is the demonstration? Because you got to remember, people still got to get their kids to school, to and from work, that sort of thing. So it's not just the fact of the demonstration that can disrupt people's lives, but is your route to and from home, to and from work, to and from your kids' school, is that going to be obstructed by the demonstration itself, or the perimeter around the demonstrations that's going to close down streets, cause traffic to overburden the streets? And it's not usually overburdened, because now that traffic that's no longer allowed to go in or around the protest has to go somewhere. So you got to stay informed, and a real good spot to stay informed in the big picture too is the FEMA website.
Okay.
And when we talk about the FEMA website, FEMA.gov, and it will give you just an enormous amount of information. What to have in an emergency first aid kit, what to stockpile as far as food, water, medicine. Don't forget your pets. Gas, have gas in your cars. So, in case something gets disrupted at gas stations. And you can't forget too, that even the hint of a disruption, let's take the recent longshoreman strike. It was in only day 2, and you had people panic buying at Costco and everything. So you're always going to have the panic buying should something happen. So you want to stock up for yourself. But the biggest thing is stay informed. The next thing is to make a plan. You need to consider potential evacuations routes from your home, from your work. What if you got to pick your kids directly up from school? Do you have other family in town that you want to come up with a rally point? Any place, let's just take the political atmosphere as the example. You want to stay away from federal buildings where, you got to look at, okay, where could they protest? So
that's a very good point, because that is something that you definitely want to obviously stay away from. The resort corridor, clearly in Las Vegas, could be a target, but I hadn't thought about the federal buildings and that kind of thing. So please elaborate on that.
Federal buildings, incumbent political figures' offices, their candidate offices, campaign offices where they were running, any place that could be a target out of people's anger and frustration, you want to stay away from.
That makes sense. So the resort corridor, obviously, in these other places, that makes a lot of sense. Now, so you mentioned the FEMA website. That's always a good idea. People should have at least a few days worth or more worth of food, water, that kind of thing. As you mentioned, pets, I mean, and now let me go back to something you said about the governor potentially. Governor Sisolak, and I'm not, once again, not asking you to get political. Governor Sisolak shut us down for a while during COVID. Another story for another podcast that I've done plenty on. But if Governor Lombardo were to see, our current governor, for those who are not in Nevada, were to see something going on or feel like potentially there could be something happening or a threat of something happening, then what could he do? He could say he can't force us to stay in our house, right? I mean, how far could he go?
Well, they forced us to stay in our house during COVID.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could walk your dog and things like that. Well, you just couldn't go other places. But
Yeah, he could, well, and it's more likely in our circumstance that it would come from the county commission than the governor,
okay,
depending on the magnitude of demonstrations, how many cities were involved in the demonstration for him to declare a state of emergency. And then he can, dictate corridors. He could dictate you stay away from these areas, stay off these roads. He could both the governor and the commission could put a curfew in place so that you're not out and about during those. His powers in an emergency are somewhat unfettered, but then it's got to be approved within 7 to 10 days. And in something like this with demonstrations, it'd probably be approved immediately.
Okay, got it. So another thing I think is important in a lot of places, Vegas seems to be worse than some other places. I've been in places where friends of mine live. People don't know their neighbors. Everybody stays in
Right.
their house. It's 115 all summer. They stay in their house with their blinds drawn and their TV on and the air conditioning running, and they don't really know their neighbors. A lot of people, and you really do need to know your neighbors because there could be a situation where you've got to communicate with each other what's going on at your end of the street. I'm not saying you need to get on these necessarily these little pages that get gossipy in neighborhoods, but you should know some neighbors, right?
Yeah, because it may come down to the fact that you may as a group want to stockpile food and stuff, or you as a
Mhm.
group may want to have within reason and within the law, not becoming a militia of checkpoints within your neighborhood. But the other thing you need to know about your neighbor is, do you have that fanatical neighbor
Mm.
who has all the signs in his yards or has meetings in their garage and has candidates out that people could gather there as a rally point to then go to a demonstration? And if you happen to be out and about, you got to stay alert.
No,
If
that I
you're
want
out
to
and
stop you
about,
there. That's really important that you said that because remember San Bernardino years ago, they had that mass shooting in the office. Remember that? And the
yes,
people were actually seen by a neighbor loading up the car with various things, but they were Muslims, and the neighbor didn't want to sound like a racist or somebody who was profiling. So the neighbor didn't say anything. So to your point, I don't care what color you are. Fanatics come in all colors. We know that.
sure.
But you're making a great point about paying attention to who's that guy down the street who's always been a little off and now he's got some weird activity happening at his house.
Right. Well, and the other thing too is the demonstration organized or is it organic? If it's
Mm,
organized, it has the tendency to be a little bit more disruptive, a little bit more violent, because whoever's backing it wants to get a certain PR out of it or attention drawn to it. And when you talk about your neighbors and stuff, maybe it's not a bad thing. You want to have a battery or solar or crank powered radio, you know, depending on your level of concern. Uh, Satellite phones, they're very inexpensive and easy to get, but that's how you're going to stay abreast of what's going on should normal communications go down and those things be necessary. But also, if you're out and about and, a demonstration, watch for people kind of dressed in the same way, headed in the same direction, you know, and if you think you're in harm, then try to get into a public building, a bank, a restaurant, go as deep into it as you can. If it's a store, maybe go in the back room, stay away from main entrances and front glass windows, but don't trap yourself. Make sure
mm,
you have an exit and do not go into the bathroom.
okay, because
You
then
have
you're
no
that's
way out.
right,
Now,
right.
um, as a last resort, if you can follow me here, I'll kind of tell you real quick too. You can secure yourself in a bathroom because most bathroom doors have a scissor hinge at the top,
Okay.
if you can envision that.
Hmm.
So if you have a belt, a purse, a lanyard, shoelaces, whatever, you just take that and you figure eight loop those items through that scissor hinge so it can't spread. That will keep the door from opening and you can secure yourself there. But that's only as a last resort because bathrooms only have one way in, one way
Right.
out. But
Right.
again, this is all part of staying alert, staying informed, being prepared. And when we talk about stockpiling items, again, you can go on the FEMA website. It'll tell you, grains, fruits and vegetables, water, how much you should have each day for each person in the residence. But you can also just get those items that you would eat anyway. The package of the box of macaroni and cheese, the cans of fruit, things like that. That if nothing comes of it, you haven't wasted a bunch of money. You can just then use it later.
Yeah, that's what they say. I've talked to people who are, well, I don't want to call them survivalists or people who are all about the prepping, and
Preppers,
that's what they'll say. They'll say, "Don't get stuff you don't ever eat." I mean,
right?
don't get MREs if you can't stand the idea of eating one. Get things you normally eat, and Top Ramen will live forever, and all those
Sure,
kinds of things. You may or may not like Top Ramen. It gives me a headache because it's so many chemicals in it, but it's better than nothing. But it should be something that you normally eat. Water is also obviously a
sure.
huge issue. People don't realize they say a gallon a day, but that's bare minimum per person. That doesn't include pets. That doesn't include doing any kind of washing of anything. I
Sure.
was thinking today about the idea of having paper plates on hand in case you can't wash dishes. That's kind of a big deal. People don't think about that. As
Well,
you
the other thing
mentioned,
they don't think about is flushing the toilet.
ooh, yes,
So what I
right,
would do is I wouldn't, get some 5-gallon jugs or some buckets and use the water out of the hose. Put it in, fill up your bathtub with water. And
right.
whenever you have to do your business, you can just, flush the toilet and use that water. But it's not overly complicated and it doesn't have to be overly expensive. Like I say, you can have those items that you already have in your home, eat on a regular basis. A generator, you can get various types of generators all up to solar power. But the thing with the generator is you got to remember some of them are gas operated,
Right.
and then some of them have a limited amount of plug-ins. And what is going to be necessary to operate electrically, especially if you have medical devices. Someone's on an oxygen tank
That's
or
a
an
great
air
point.
pump or something
My
like that.
mom is,
So
I have friends who are, that's a big deal, and you're right, that can be
yeah,
obviously life and
how
death.
powerful is it and how many outlets have it? For my household, we'd probably only be concerned about our refrigerator and freezer. But then
Right.
again, where do you put that generator if it's gas powered and you need to operate your freezer in the garage and your refrigerator in the house and that sort of thing? And then you can all the way get up. How do you keep yourself safe and secure? And what about your extended family throughout town? Do you guys want to form up a rally point where, okay, if anything happens, this is where we're going?
It would seem to me that if you have a bug out vehicle of any kind or something that you could use as a bug out vehicle, a big pickup truck, obviously an RV trailer, anything like that, that should ideally be stocked just with enough to get you on the road, get you going, have gas in it, enough food to get you for a few days, something like that, right?
Yeah, at the hint of any of these things, you will probably gas up all your vehicles, but your um, RV, your fifth wheel, your camper on the truck, that's just an oversized go bag.
Mhm.
If you're familiar with a go bag, if you travel
Right.
in foreign countries, depending on where you're going and the stability of those countries, you should always have a go bag with a little extra cash, some clothes, some toiletries, that sort of thing. So if you have that, and again, it's probably stuff you already have in there for when you do go camping and you do go
Oh,
out
right,
in
right.
the wilderness, dehydrated such, can this, can that, beans, rice, condensed or powdered milk, powdered eggs. It doesn't have to be overly expensive. And again, it's stuff that, okay, I didn't use it for that. Well, let's bring it back in the house and use it.
Absolutely. Now, when do people know? I see every time we have major fires in various places or floods or things like that. It seems to me, just as an observer watching from a distance, not being involved in it, but it seems to me that people often wait way too long. And I know that at home is generally the safest place to be if you can stay there, but a lot of times it's not. So, how do you gauge in a civil unrest situation or something like that? How do you gauge when it's time to get out versus just, hunkering down in your own home?
Sure. Well, first off, what is this? What is the root of the civil unrest? And to what
Okay.
magnitude do you expect it to be? Is it just going to be confined to downtown? Is there reports of looting and violence throughout neighborhoods? Those sort of things. And that's, again, I'll go back to the most important thing. The most important two things in civil unrest: stay informed, or three things: stay informed, stay alert, and have a plan.
Hmm. Makes sense.
And
And
like I
just the
said,
other
you go
day,
to that FEMA website and you can, make up a plan. And the other thing too, you want to make sure of, do you need to take important documents with you
yes,
when you leave in case it does spread and that sort of thing? So, but
or at
I'm
least
telling you
take a
that FEMA
picture of them.
website,
At least take
it,
a picture of your insurance and things like that. Take a quick
sure.
video of your house inside contents, those kinds of things. I mean, that matters a lot. People need to do that. I would think that's obviously hugely important.
Right. And how much cash do you need?
Hmm.
Go to your bank, depending again on the magnitude of it. Will the banking get disrupted? Will power grids get disrupted? Again, so a lot of it's going to depend on staying alert, watching the media. A media that you trust is going to give you accurate reporting as to what's the root of the civil unrest and the magnitude of it as it's being reported.
Now let me ask you about when depending on how on a person's proximity. Once again, we're here in Vegas, so we're talking about the resort corridor, as we call it, the Strip. Uh, when we think about that, I would think of that as being the main target. As you mentioned, federal buildings just tend to be in that part of town. Also, your average neighborhood is not going to probably be subject to civil unrest even after this election. We don't know for sure, but I would assume that a neighborhood that generally is problem free is probably going to continue to be that way because neighbors, look at the other day. I had police officers in my neighborhood, and I walked by and I said, "What's all the excitement? We don't really get you guys around here." And the one guy goes, "Yeah, we never come over here."
Yeah.
Which is good, right? So those neighborhoods I would think would be the most likely to have problems, correct?
Yeah. In the average neighborhood, you're probably not going to have much going on again, unless you have that one fanatical neighbor that everybody comes there, or he decides to take it upon himself to have a demonstration in your neighborhood. But the only way your neighborhood's going to get disrupted is your routes. Will it
Right,
come to a
right.
point where they set up checkpoints? Will it come to a route where they just close down streets? And again, that's why I talk about the panic buying. Are they going to close things down and you're not able to get to the store or the gas station? And you're always going to have those people that, my humble opinion, overreact, panic buy, and that sort of thing. But you have to remember too what the first responders are going to be going through. And if the governor declares a state of emergency, or let's say it was so bad the president declared a state of emergency, you're going to you're going to have maybe the National Guard involved. And the thing that's hard for first responders is, this is an emergency. I'm leaving my family because I
Right.
have to go protect a bunch of strangers. So
Mhm.
that's their first stressor. But typically, like, I'll use Metro as the example, when we have any large unusual occurrence, especially if it's known, like let's use New Year's Eve as the example. Usually Metro will go to A and what they call A and B rosters. A rosters will be handling normal calls of service. The B roster will be handling anything related to the unrest. If they have knowledge, or in the immediate, I remember back when PepCon exploded,
I do. I
we
remember.
got called into work. Days off get canceled. Vacations get canceled. So not only the officers having to do A and B rosters, but think about this. Some of them have to be assigned to firefighters. Some of
Right,
them have to be assigned to ambulances. Some of them may have to be assigned to hospitals, because whatever the magnitude is. So
right.
your law enforcement, your fire services, hospitals, ambulance services may be stretched kind of thin. And that's why, as us in the law enforcement community, we are prepared. We prepare our families, because we're not going to be there to protect them. We're not going
That's
to be
so
there,
important.
even something as simple as giving them guidance as to what do I do next, or that sort of thing. So in the first responder community, that's our first stressor, is we're leaving our families.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of PepCon, if you're not from Vegas or you weren't here in Vegas at the time, PepCon blew up 1988. I remember I was working at Sam's Town, and they were doing construction upstairs. And the first bomb that went off, explosion, which we could feel all over this was 10 miles from Sam's Town, right? This thing blew up. So the first bomb went off, and I thought they dropped something heavy on the second floor. I didn't know what was going on. And we all kind of went, "What was that?" Second bomb, I grabbed my purse. I was out the door. I said, "I,
Mhm.
I don't. It wasn't a bomb. It was an explosion. I don't even care." But that was a huge deal for everybody in Vegas for this thing to blow up. It was a factory that made rocket fuel components and whatnot. And, and my matter of fact, my pastor was in the building working when PepCon blew up. And that was a whole crazy thing. But that was a big deal, Dominic. But that was a big deal for Vegas at the time. And nobody knew how bad it was. I mean, glass windows blew out for miles around.
Yeah.
It was completely crazy. And that's the kind of thing where it's all hands on deck. And that's what would happen. But your point is well taken about the fact that when your family's going to need you the most, your family's going to have to be independent because you're going to have to go out there and protect people you don't even know as a first responder.
Well, I remember distinctly dropping my 4-year-old daughter off at childcare, getting into work, getting suited up and getting out there. And PepCon is in Henderson's jurisdiction, but obviously back in, especially in 88, it was still an extremely small agency. So we were all out there, but your resources. The other thing they'll do is they'll go to what we call level 2 call screening. So we're not answering the barking dog call. We're not answering a disturbance or a person refusing to leave a casino. It's going to strictly those on the fringe emergency calls. But I just say that to say this, that because first responder resources are going to be stretched, makes it even more important that you have a plan. And you can't have just one route of escape. Because what if that one route of escape is where the demonstration is?
Very important. And
it's the same thing in your house.
Yeah.
If you make a safe plan, a safe room in your house, how do you get out of the second floor? How do you get out of the first floor?
Right.
What if you're in the garage? You have to have the ability to think on your feet, be flexible, and use those routes that are available it's the same way in an active shooter. You have to listen for the shots because you don't want to be running into the shooter.
Right.
Because you weren't paying attention to where the shots were coming from.
Exactly.
So you have to have a couple different plans in place. But I'm telling you, Heidi, if you go to that FEMA website, they provide so much, even laying out your plan, laying out what important paperwork you should have. But again, I can't stress enough. It's stay informed, stay alert, have a plan.
Yeah, it's important. And I'm not going to sit here and bash FEMA because they do good things and sometimes they don't, but that's like any other agency. I have a friend who lives in Virginia where they were hit very badly by Helene and most of the town they live in was washed away. FEMA wasn't there for weeks. And they all came together as a community, the people who had anything left and pooled their food and all that kind of stuff. And so at the end of the day, I don't care whether it's a fire, a hurricane, whatever it is, you are the first responder. You have to be prepared. I remember reading a book years ago, great book by Marvin Olasky. It's called The Politics of Disaster. And one of the things he mentioned in there was that when people went into the New Orleans Dome after Katrina, it wasn't because their houses were destroyed. It was because they didn't have 2 days worth of food in the house. You are the first responder. The first responders are going to be a little bit busy with people who can't prepare, who may be handicapped or at some kind of physical disadvantage. But you, as a person who has the wherewithal and the ability, you need to do everything you can to prepare because they're not going to be knocking on your door 5 minutes after anything happens.
No. Well, and in this case, fortunately, when I speak of FEMA, it's just getting information from them so that you are prepared. But that's what always baffled me when I see that individual on the news and go, well, we didn't have any food for 2 days. Was it a shock to you that the hurricane was coming? And the other thing,
4 days, you saw the little spinny thing.
If you think back to New Orleans, look at the mess they left.
Right.
What does all of humanity's, how to be a human being go out the window? But yeah, you would just frequently in any disaster, they talk about, well, we didn't have this and we didn't have that. You're right. You are your first responder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unfortunately, we have pockets of people all over America who've never done anything for themselves. The government comes in and wipes their butt for everything. And then when things happen, bad things happen, they're not resilient. They're not resourceful. Like my friends in Virginia are all coming together. And my friend said, there is no looting. Everyone has guns. There's no looting at all. There's none of that nonsense. They're all coming together and helping each other, but they don't expect government to come in and they're not looking around for, they're taking care of themselves. So people who are not resourceful and resilient, when bad things happen, it's going to be much worse on them just because they can barely get through the day anyway.
Right. And again, it depends on the magnitude of the civil unrest. And again, that can take a lot of shapes. But if we just want to use as the example, because of the moment, the political atmosphere and what can come out of that, it's going to be demonstrations, organic, organized, depending on, who's doing it, how big it gets. Are they bussing people in? or is it just one that grew out of Facebook? Hey, we're going down to the Foley Federal Building and we're going to protest. Come one, come all. And the other thing is, don't forget about your churches. Talk to your pastors about, hey, if something happens, are your churches, stockpiling anything or have the availability to stockpile? And you got to figure the weather too. If it's extended, they might have those little thermal blankets and everything. And the other thing is, don't forget the elderly folks in your neighborhood.
That's right.
Again, we can pretty much say that it won't spread to neighborhoods, but
you don't know for sure. And by the way, another idea is to make friends with your Mormon neighbors. If you're not, if you're not somebody who's stocked up, and you don't know Mormons, they stock up on things. So you. Yeah, well, it's great advice, and I think it's important because we don't know what's going to happen after the election. I hope nothing bad happens, but anybody can be subject to anything like that at any time. So Tom Page, once again, great to have you. We're having a lot of fun with these kind of side podcasts that we're doing, and we'll talk to you guys more about this as we start to do something different with this as time goes on. Very excited about that. And
well, preparation breeds confidence. You stay alert, you stay informed, you have a plan, know your escape routes, and if a demonstration looks like it's forming, leave the area.
Makes sense to me. Just what's the rule? Number one rule: don't be there. Right?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Tom, so much. Appreciate you. We will talk again about another subject that's very important to people and their safety and awareness.
Always a pleasure. Always a privilege.
All right. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it.
Thank you.